It's an interesting thing how almost casually you can think back on horrible moments of your life. There were weeks where I only slept one night the whole 7 days, which was born out of fear from terrible jobs that made me regret every schooling decision I made, which came about from that first moment of intense loneliness in a dorm room on opening weekend. These were once intense feelings that took over my entire life when I felt them, where eating and sleeping or friends or family fell to the wayside in terrible ways. You wonder, when you're awake for so long at once, how hours can pass so slowly, and now these moments are just vague internal monologue played across rolling hills on a drive to nowhere, or as the water runs down the shower drain, or as work steals another day of life. It's so easy to slip into them rather than thinking about all the present issues like, well, identity, or where you'll be living 2 years from now, or the move that you'll be making in just over a month, or all kinds of pressing issues. Those are the kinds of things I end up pushing to the side for a moment, or else I would never be able to effectively write a script or maybe even function in daily life. The contrast between the ease of those thoughts, an objectively horrible past experience, versus a fairly manageable current one is interesting given the matter of them.
There are plenty of reasons for this, from growth to mental load to simple time between now and then, but I think it also comes from uncertainty. The past, even though it might be horrible, is certain and set. It happened, we remember some details, and that is the memory. It's almost like the ability to live a certain moment once more, and meanwhile, the present, well, I can hardly even tell you where I'll be tomorrow or who I'll be there as. Sometimes you don't even know where this night is going. Nothing is set, and every moment is an evolution of all things at once. It's kind of inherently overwhelming to live in this uncertain present, connected with everyone else's uncertain present. So a past, even a horrible one, becomes almost a comfort. It's the one thing we can know for certain.
The reaction this creates, a desire for the past, a contempt for the present, and how those are expressed, is what we'll be exploring today. I originally wanted this to be a video that covered multiple series, but it was a case of digging into one story and finding way too much to go without, so we'll be focusing on just Cowboy Bebop for now. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth a watch to remember an important classic alone, aside from the absolute charm, unmatched feel, pure entertainment, and reserves of slowly explored depth that we'll be exploring today. But if you just want the video, I'll cover everything you need to know, and if you've seen it before, don't worry, I'll be brief to not bore you with pure recap. This might be surprising, but we'll be locking in on just one character in a beloved cast, Faye Valentine, whose introduction places her as Lady Luck, a literal hundreds-year-old legend of the solar system, even as they admit this makes no sense.
I had no idea the legendary Lady Luck was still alive. Poker Alice, Queen of Hearts.
If Alice was still alive, she'd be over 200 years old.
That's true. Considering you're looking pretty good.
It's a bit of a rose-tinted view. Faye is a liar, a cheater, and a thief, scamming her way across planets to build up enough funds to gamble them all away at once. Using the idea of a lady who needs pampering as she scarfs down literal dog food, she seems like nothing more than an immature cheat at first glance, living off of the graces of Spike and Jet. But what we find deep down isn't an act of selfishness or stupidity, at least not purely, but rather one of necessity. A woman cursed to be behind in life, desperately seeking just to catch up. Despite Bebop being set in 2071, Faye was born in 1994, a whole 77 years prior, making her an actual millennial. She came from a seemingly wealthy family on Earth, living there before the lunar gate destroyed most of its surface, but falling victim to a space shuttle accident at the age of 20, which left her deeply harmed. With medical technology unable to properly save her life at that time, she's placed in cryosleep, where she remains for 54 years until 2068. She wakes up with no memory of her past or herself, and there are no records to indicate anything further since they were lost in that 2022 lunar gate accident. And in debt from what's technically 54 years of medical care without insurance, and you get a woman who doesn't just have nothing, but has negative anything in her life. Everything she does is built on a blank slate of memory, with whatever created her personality originally well lost to time. Well, she does keep some of her functional memories, like what objects look like and their purposes, but this doesn't actually provide her much.
That's a monitor. That's a cellular phone. A hot water pot.
This is not a monitor. It's a washing machine. And this is not a cell phone. It's a biothermometer. This isn't a hot water pot. It's a face cleaner.
This is where things get interesting as we start to consider her story a bit deeper. With 54 years having passed, she has to relearn everything about how the world works. This isn't just that she's lost her memories and has to trust the people who used to be around her to guide her as she lives out the life she once had. This is about having to relearn everything about the world and how it functions before you can even get started on wondering on who you are as a person. It's not even knowing the money you can use to buy things or what one of it is really worth. The entire world around her is uncertain, and this is an overwhelming fact. We see this directly when she runs away from the hospital for a moment. Holographic ads pop up into her face from vending machines, sending her into a panic before it all shuts back down into a lifeless, empty state behind her as spaceships fly overhead on the road, failing to notice the stranded woman. It leaves her nowhere to go but running down an empty road alone, from somewhere she doesn't know to somewhere she doesn't know. Her life has no beginning and no end to provide direction. Most everything she does is to avoid this feeling from ever happening again.
And so she takes one quick way to find it, a pretty appealing way given it squashes her uncertainty while filling the gaps of this new world at once to further prevent uncertainty. Other people. They're a literal guide to life, to her merging the functionality of past bits she recalls with the future she's now living. To be able to function in a wider world through new customs, new objects, new responsibilities, and more, a vulnerable woman ripe to be taken advantage of could use a guide like this, which she finds in her lawyer, Whitney. Being close with him wards off all that anxiety of not knowing the world because he can show it to her, while also pushing back against personal uncertainty, wondering who she is and further what she's worth. Someone with a full life of their own is choosing to spend days of it with Faye, adding literal time value to who she is. A day together, a nice dress, a couple of good meals, if nothing else. Whitney seems to love her for who she is, even. She can be shocked by something simple as a book or scarf down endless meals at a late-night diner in just a hospital outfit and his jacket, and he'll keep smiling softly and offering more meals. In a world where she woke up and was hardly checked for signs of life before being asked to pay her debt, this is someone who's showing her the world, buying her new things so she can shape her sense of self like capitalism wants us to, and most of all, accepting her despite the setbacks. Without saying it, he's saying that herself, as it is now, without a past, is fine.
That limitation of his time and energy is a certain thing in an uncertain world, as the selves of others show something about our own. They begin to meld with our situation, their place and status in life saying something of ours, the reasons we choose them and they chose us highlighting our personality. Our best qualities are worth keeping around and our worst ones are worth the best. So this seems like the perfect thing for her, an aid to us all even. When faced with uncertainty, we can go to the others. Faye falls in love so quickly and easily because of just how much others mean to us, and in her case, how he literally was her whole world.
But since this is a flashback, we know it isn't to last. Because just as other people provide us with a sense of certainty, we see that the others are actually inherently uncertain, adding more and more layers to doubt and worry over. At the most basic, this comes down to chance. How will time and place rob us of what we have? We see this in Bebop. Whitney dies in an accident while trying to keep Faye safe from overly anxious debt collectors, leaving her alone in a world once again. No matter how much he might have desired to keep her safe from a harsh world, how many times he held her literally close while dancing to present this, it means nothing when faced with overall chaos. Think about the space shuttle disaster that brought her here to begin with. She made the decision to go on it, but she had no hand in whatever mess up or disrepair caused it to malfunction and alter her life in this way. And even if she wasn't on that, the Lunargate accident 8 years later could have had the exact same result for the exact same reason as far as her life is concerned. None. The same kind of thing can happen to anyone at any time, like it does to the one person who's made her life any better. And now she simply keeps living, knowing better was possible, but without having the means she achieved it with. In a way, this has really just validated her anxiety. Yes, she can find something good in life, but she can lose it even easier. A car crash of one moment wiping out days, weeks, months of love and time and energy and even cost. A lot of effort only to end up in a worse place. Is the uncertainty of other people really worth the risk?
And this isn't just in the natural chaos of disasters or decay, but in the chaos of other people as well. The very will which let us value each other can let us devalue each other just the same. For example, when Whitney dies, he actually leaves Faye with all of his assets. But
those are all his debts, but they say debt is an asset.
And then, just to rub it in further, it turns out that some 3 years later, he's still alive even with a bounty on his head for conning women out of their money. So there was no romance, no loving her for who she was, because he would have loved anyone. There was just a con job, a chosen chaos. The ability for other people to make decisions that impact our lives without our input, the uncertainty of someone else's will. Half the time we can't even tell what we ourselves are feeling or thinking, let alone the people around us. And so we can get even more anxious with this in mind. Are they actually giving us some certainty to ourselves and some value, or are they just using us, planning to take it all away? Are they memories which we were made that should help define us, actually just a plot or soon to be ended by some random decision, something well outside of ourselves that harms us? Are we simply setting ourselves up to be knowing what we could be missing? To think we could ever be certain with people starts to seem nonsensical in all this worry.
This is doubled down on in Whitney's parting words to Faye as she captures him for that bounty on his head. He remarks through the jailhouse bars at her
that I fell in love with you while you were sleeping. I fell in love with Sleeping Beauty.
Before then retracting that statement by saying it too was a lie. Well, this just seems like more deception, maybe an attempt just to get out of jail again. It actually makes things more interesting. If it was cut and dry, that he was just using her to clear his debts or just trying to manipulate her again now, well then, at least from this would arise some certainty. She was used. She can forget all that and move on, start somewhere new. Square one is at least a definitive space. But if he did actually love her through all of that, as his embarrassment here somewhat suggests, well, what does she do with those memories now? Buying her a dress and then transferring her debts is probably a con, but going dancing in it later, was that a part of the con too? She has fond memories of great days, and they could have easily come from true care, but they also have the taint of knowing that care wasn't enough. Does it prove that she was valuable enough to love, but just that space living is harsh and clearing debts is the only way to move on, and that's more important? Hell, she knows that better than anyone, so she could understand, and to a degree even seems to with how she leaves on quite a soft and gentle note. But whatever feeling it leaves her with a fact too: uncertainty. Other people will always add more chaos. There are no black and white situations, there are only, well, situations. Being with others to solve the self means weeding through interactions carefully to discern the point, trusting the will of them to simulate certainty. It's a daunting task, one which has never paid off for her, and starting from so far behind, not a very viable one. Every person who seeks her after Whitney only does so for the money on her head, and most people she runs into are looking for something else from her that's a little more, well, I think you understand. People never desired her, but only for her situation or her body, further reinforcing this truth. So in the search for herself, these other people can't be relied on. To figure this out is a solitary task. Faye summarizes it as such:
I don't need any comrades. They're not worth it. I end up worrying about things I shouldn't. Instead of feeling alone in a group, it's better to have real solitude all by yourself.
I think the use of worry there really does express this. It's a thing of anxiety, of not knowing what the future will hold specifically because of someone else, their actions in a world which she can't control. We can only be certain of ourselves, where we've been, why, how, and so on. That's to say, to some degree, our past. So her search changes from guidance in the future to the self in the past. But with her past unapparent and lost time, she's going to be taking some time to figure that out. And in this world, you don't survive strictly alone. You can't get by in a cold, endless vacuum with millions in debt. She doesn't know how to repair her ship alone or have the clean record to pass through every single gate, and with people after her, it's risky to never have company. Other people are kind of required, but they introduced that worry which ruined her life and broke her trust. So this leads to one logical response. If people always have a chance of making your life worse, you have to do it to them first. Take what you can, and then run.
We see this time and time again, as in the current day she ends up aboard the Bebop, bounty hunting with Spike and Jet to make ends meet. Sometimes. From men hauling high explosives to renegade satellites, Faye forces her way into their company, using their shower and eating their food, to their dismay. At first, it's clearly for the utility of it all. Spike and Jet are the kind of people who care just enough to not throw another person into space alone, despite their rocky start together. But she goes from being handcuffed in the bathroom to taking a comfortable spot on the couch soon enough, as they split what little bounty they do collect fairly and always return to the same place together. And that's where the real danger begins. Now that they care about each other, however slight or shrouded, it means that value can be taken away. So she ends up cleaning out the fridge, the safe at least once, and leaving during the night as habit. It's the only way to be certain that they won't leave you to leave them. It does present a lonely outcome, drifting through space on the generosity of others without companionship. But it isn't the worst outcome, and that's the point. It sacrifices the best and the worst outcomes alike to ride somewhere down the middle. You might never have the comfort and connection of close friends or love, but you never have someone rip all those things away from you either. You leave them, making them the worthless ones that you, in comparison, can't be. It keeps some control in her hands during the world's chaos, a sense of security that she might not be able to stay, but leaving is always a choice. Removing herself from everyone else is one bit of certainty in a life which has never had it.
But deep down, she's quite aware of a need for other people, that maybe the certainty isn't worth what it costs. We can see this in what actually happens when she leaves, at least from the Bebop. She's always found or finds some excuse to come back. In Jupiter Jazz, she cleans out their safe and flees to Callisto, a frozen moon of Jupiter. In the basics of what happens here, we see that she's never really alone, simply removed from a previous situation for another temporary one. This is an outpost of entirely men, so she sticks out like a sore thumb, which is kind of her wish. Feeling aggravated, she wants them to come after her so she can kick their asses to vent her frustrations. While it's a small, silly detail, it proves an important point. To express those feelings, to feel a bit of power, important parts of finding or making herself, she needs other people, even if only as something for her fist to meet. After all, what's a punch worth without something to feel it? But it goes clearly further than that, into more positive emotional needs. She disables the Bebop before she leaves, but not the smaller ships they could easily use to get around still. And by stealing what's in their safe first, even though it's only some 20,000 Wulongs, she gives them a reason to use those non-disabled ships to trace her rather than just letting it be. She doesn't actually want to be alone. She wants to be chased. It's the natural extension of how leaving others provides some semblance of value. Letting someone spend their time and energy on you for some reason within their heart, like Whitney did, is dangerous. It's vulnerable, even if it is valuable. But forcing them to do so for a reason you chose, like stealing their money, is a safe way to have someone expend themselves in your name still. Each mile they travel to track her down is proof of a value they find in her, even if that value is cold, hard cash. In fact, that might actually be even better.
Think about it. Love is a nebulous thing. It's undefinable, a distinct feeling for each and every person, and how it's expressed is just as varied. It will always be uncertain. But money? Well, aside from long-term conditions or outright disasters, money is money. 20K on your head is always 20K on your head, whatever the reason someone desires that money. This cat and mouse routine she develops with Spike and Jet is actually quite a validating thing. Rather than sitting on a ship where time and safety can let uncertainty creep in through your doubts, where small expressions of care, like a fresh meal of beef and peppers, or well, at least peppers, begins to fade into the background and stop providing value from being so common. This escaping and coming back sort of refreshes things. The small moments you do stick around for feel more valuable when they're novel than once they've grown stale, when they have the cold loneliness of space to contrast with. It's like how much a meal from home means when you've been back for the first time in years. What was once mundane and almost annoying is now exciting.
But this system never actually provides certainty. It just simulates it for moments at a time. Faye still wants, or maybe even needs, her past to provide that. After all, the past is certainty, that set thing to say, this is who you are, where you were, how you came to be. Unlike others who help simulate, it can't fight back or change or judge you for who you are, because it is who you are. It's very desirable for that answer to the self, one which can never leave us. This is why she can run from everything else so easily, but to her past so quickly. And this is what we see when a beta cassette is delivered to the Bebop in her name. Of course, at first glance, she assumes it's about her debts and runs when Jet asks her to pay him back for the shipping. While he and Spike try to track down a way to play it, wanting to get something from it at least, she's off gambling at the tracks, returning just after a player for the tape is also delivered. The package with no return address has been bouncing all over the solar system from her former self. It's a time capsule she made as a teenager, a message to her future self. Watching with absolute wonder in her eyes, Faye for the first time has a hint at her past, definitive details in the background to analyze and find, possibly jogging her memory. And eventually it works, as Ed, the fourth of the crew picked up along the way, recalls the statue on Earth and takes Faye there. While this space specifically doesn't work, it does jog her memory just enough for more important details, and she's able to return to the house she once lived in, running up the same hill she did time and time again as a child, bursting through the threshold to find her memories, and there is nothing. The Earth's surface was destroyed many years ago. The memories of all people held in those places picked over for anything of value left, all gone, all empty now. There's nothing here for her. No family to tell her who she was, no one to love with absolute certainty, no place, not even a structure to call her own. All she can do is draw out a space where her bed should have been and stay there, lying on the cold ground alone. Finding her past didn't change anything. And this is from something she told herself on that very tape, a meaning Faye missed in this quite blind search for an answer, that there is no answer to the self. It's always changing and evolving, becoming something new based on time and place and connections and situation and many more things. This is exactly why people can't provide certainty. We are inherently uncertain just by existing. As her past self says,
"Today, you are who you are today, see? You're still me, but you're a newer version."
It's not hello Faye, but hello other Faye, new Faye. As she gives her future self a cheer, an act of encouraging someone else, it's made clear. The past isn't certainty about the self, but only where the self once was. It can only encourage us on, influence us where we go and who we go with, but never directly create those things as it sits on the sidelines where people cheer. The only way to ever have a self set in stone to avoid this uncertainty is to not be living.
The fact that people have to change like this inherently spoils the whole thing. We see this when Faye is actually recognized by an old friend, now an elderly woman who approaches her. She remarks about how long it's been and how crazy this is, but is interrupted by her granddaughter rushing up and telling her it's time to go home. And before anything can come of this, Faye says she's a ghost and runs away. It may seem odd. Why not ask this person for more details? Why not track down the past from her or reconnect and find something there, anything? The point is, though, that she can't, as the past changed from underneath her. This is someone she knew as a carefree teenager, not an elderly woman with grandchildren and a fleshed out full life of memories. She doesn't have a friend here. She has a new person who remembers an old one. Even if they recounted memories all day, what good did the activities of a teenager 100 years ago do for a woman drifting in space now? The only certainty about the past is that it's gone and done, that it's dead.
what we have to be to ever be certain. And so this isn't something she truly wants for others. Deep down, she knew this, seeing when she tries to stop both Gren and Spike from chasing down Vicious to their certain deaths. She would rather have them be alive and uncertain than dead and set in stone. The only way someone can provide you value is if they're there, if they're alive, growing and changing and making decisions where they could possibly leave you. They have to be picking you over something else, an act of necessary comparison to validate ourselves, to prove what they are for moments at a time. I think this is the only real solution. Since being human requires being uncertain, then the only answer is to stave off that uncertainty for moments at a time by choosing to be with the others, moving beyond that captivating idea of the past to prove something in the present and hope for it in the future. The problem is, though, that this is something pretty difficult in its own right. Uncertainty is actually a pretty good shield for the self, just as it detracts from it.
Let's jump back to the tape for a moment. When Faye runs away in that episode, she actually ends up doing quite well at the track, winning bet after bet. Given how many times they scold her before her running away, she'd expect them to call and complain, shouting at her to return and pay her debts with what she just won, goddammit. However, she ends up being the one to call instead, hoping to celebrate her winnings, where she gets Ed cheerily telling her that they're actually further away from where she is instead. The transmission cuts out and she's left alone in this crowd, the only person sitting solo in a busy place full of people either celebrating their wins together or deafening the sound of loss with each other. She may have just won big for a moment finally, but without anyone to tell or bring it back to, her good feelings run cold. There isn't much victory to be had alone. That sadness that she stews in for a moment says a lot. If they'd at least yelled at her, even if not tracking her down, it would have been some proof of importance. If you're making them angry, you're still in their head at least. And it would have given her an excuse to head back on her own, since they would want to be repaid, right? In the end, this is what she finds anyway when she loses it all on one last bet, and actually seems to move on pretty quickly from such a loss. Sure, she's used to losing that much, but it also means she had an excuse to go back to the Bebop. After all, where else can a broke lady with debts like her and a bounty really go?
This is what she was looking for, an excuse. It's what the Bebop crew uses for everything, never stating their feelings in direct terms, but always in passive, doubtful ones. Once again, to the tape. When she comes back just as they're ready to watch it, on the excuse we just mentioned, Jet tells her that she can't until she repays the debt, and never one to be flustered by money, Faye agrees and walks off confidently, and they start to watch it. But notice how they never check to actually see that she's gone past pressing play, or no one listening for a door sound, or seeing how far she went, or anything like that. In fact, we later know that she has the whole setup in her room to watch over and over again, meaning they cared enough to keep this stuff and let her have it, rather than trying to get back their losses on it. Not to mention, the reason they left her behind instead of chasing her was to go on an adventure to find a way to play the tape well out of their way for something she owns that they could have just as easily sold for its rarity instead. They do care, and maybe even love each other. The very reason she feels so devalued is exactly because they were trying to do something of value for her, but never told her that. The issue is that they rely on these doubtful, veiled gestures instead of communicating it in a certain way, so much so that by the time she expressed care more directly from learning this very lesson, it's too late.
My memory finally came back. Nothing good came of it. There was no place for me to return to. This was the only place I could go. And now you're leaving, just like that.
Uncertainty in the hostile vacuum of space has become a sort of comfort to them. Even if they're not all running away literally, they're running away from connection in one way or another. They never state feelings directly, instead relying on gestures which they could excuse away with something simple. They didn't track down the tape for her to see it. They did it for their own curiosity, of course, to see what's on it to maybe sell it for more. There's always a layer of doubt, some guarded uncertainty that the things they do and say. To protect themselves, they're never exactly honest. But since we crave certainty so highly, this means they'll always be looking elsewhere. Just as there's no excuse to come back, there's an excuse to leave because you can never know for certain if they love you or just seem like it for a moment. You can always reason that they don't and fly away. So they end up running to their pasts like Faye does time and time again because the people in their lives never give what the past seems to. If they just spoke to each other more, said what they were feeling, things could have ended up okay, could have had a happy ending. But instead they all drift apart, each going in their own direction to look for that thing we all crave so much, even in some cases to their deaths, finally solidifying that being. In the end, Faye is exactly where she feared, alone and with the knowledge that she didn't have to be. In trying to avoid the pain of her recent past, all she did was create the exact conditions to feel it in the worst way, crying as the only people in her life either shut her out or run away to die. She was never really preventing the worst option, but more like kicking the can down the road. The only option is to lean into that fear, to express what little certainty we can through direct statements which make our feelings known and hope that it helps. At least then things might be okay. It's uncertain creatures desperately trying not to be through each other.
One thing I can say as a fact is that there are parts of Faye's story which I really relate to. I was always flighty in my relationships, to say the least. I had a terrible one in my late teenage years, which I can pretty accurately describe as hate in the form of sport across 36 or so months. The or so is from all the times where we broke up, usually because, and I'm essentially quoting here, they got sick of people easily. It would take these wild swings from a honeymoon phase where we do nothing but text and spend every moment we got between classes together rushing across the school for that hit of validation, to me sitting around on the couch all night doing nothing but waiting for something more than a solo okay text. I can still vividly remember how my stomach would turn over as many times as my phone did from that beige couch in a shitty drop ceiling basement, set down just to get rapidly checked again at the first hint of any sound. You know, it's those times where everything starts to feel like your phone's vibration. I can remember how I could have been sitting a few more feet forward playing video games with friends online, but I didn't because I'd cut them all out for hers. I can remember the pangs of anxiety as I went to play the card games I liked because the one time I enjoyed them with friends at my birthday party instead of talking to her, so she got mad about that, and now it would always sour the mood if they were even mentioned. I always had to come up with some excuse to do it, so I got in a terrible habit of lying. These feelings changed and even took over my life, in many ways made me worse. Time and place were rendered irrelevant to the tyranny of someone else's uncertain emotions and vapid desires. I had to always be thinking, what had I done to upset them this time? What had I done to lose this thing which used to make me feel valuable? What would I be feeling the next time it ended? Those questions circled and the rest of the world stopped existing just at the time where I should have been deciding my future. I never really thought about it until now, but that turmoil and that hyper-focus just at the cusp of college might have been part of why I'm in this mess now of hating every moment before 5 p.m. I so desperately wanted to quell that uncertainty or keep getting that hit that I pushed my entire future to the side to deal with it, unable to comprehend what would come next. It's probably come across now that the uncertainty of someone else's feelings controlled my life, and when it finally ended for good, destroyed it too. It struck me deep to my core how something which once made me feel valued like never before, the awkward kid who somehow ended up with that person a lot of people felt they should have had over me, became the reason I got in the habit of crying in the shower at 6 a.m. before driving an hour to start my college classes. I cried over silly things, thinking about how someone else would be with them at those family gatherings that I hated going to, but you put up with it because it was time with them, and that just felt good. There's an almost magical value in that, the ability to be somewhere you absolutely hate and would never be on your own, but do it anyway because someone let you into that horrible place with them, and your feelings together sitting there almost make this bubble of space that's okay right in the middle of this thing you don't want to be, this place you don't want to be in. After things ended, I still wanted that value. I wanted to feel the purpose gained in someone else's time and energy, but at the same time, I was afraid. because having it once is exactly what led me to feel an even greater lack of it now, to know what I was missing. I mean, I was crying over things I didn't even realize could be sad before that breakup, missing things I once desperately sought to avoid at any cost possible. It was a feeling that changed my world. And so I had the same realization that you see in fiction. I never actively thought about it, that I'd become the kind of person who fled at the first hint of danger to prevent myself from getting hurt, but it did happen. As far as I knew, there was just some weird feeling that started to take over any relationship I had after a first fight, even a small one. It was just this gnawing sense of that nothing I did mattered, that we were wasting our time here, that it had to end. It was usually began with something over text, where I'd be out having a fun night with friends and I'd get a more serious message. And the second I read it, that "we have to talk" style phrase or tone they exuded, that thing that meant it suddenly wasn't going to be fun, but was going to be more work, I would lock up. I instantly stopped having any kind of fun or being able to develop any thoughts outside of a focus on that situation which had come up. It reminded me so much of how my stomach would turn over from their solo okay text, and to be able to function anymore at all, I just needed it to be gone. I still feel bad to this day for anyone who was with me when it happened, because it was the topic for the rest of my night. If we were supposed to be doing something together, we weren't anymore. And I can't even recall what any of the substance to those texts or conversations actually was, but I can recall that feeling so vividly. It became a catastrophe in my head. If we were already having issues in a relationship this early, what would happen later when we got to a more serious state? When we decided on something like the same college or maybe even the same house? What if it happened after we said "I love you" again? What if what I was feeling in that moments before, all those times again, came back and continued? And what if it took over my entire life again, changed the course of it, the trajectory, made me a different person from the feelings of someone else? Those relationships were providing me value. They were people who wanted to give their time and their energy to me, and I took it because it felt good. But I was so afraid of what could happen when that time and energy became an investment, that when there was any proof we could have issues down the line, more than just fun, I would immediately tank the relationship. I'd respond less and less, sit further and further on the couch, and eventually end up with someone slamming a door as I took way too many words to say it's over. None of the breakups were clean, because really there was nothing that went wrong. Every single one was blindsided, punished for having the gall to want anything more than plain and simple pleasure derived from another. I would leave and convince myself that I couldn't be with anyone else until I fixed myself. And deeper down, whenever I got a little bit angry about those feelings, that people just simply weren't worth it because of the trouble they caused. I can't control their actions like my own, and that's always a recipe for pain. And then a few months later, I'd be reasoning that, well, I have to do it for sometimes things as silly as, well, we had crushes on each other 2 years ago. I have to. The reality was just that I couldn't leave that kind of value behind. It meant too much to just be discarded forever. After all, if I could tear an entire life down, it had to be able to build one up too. I wanted to feel good. I was drawn to it without even realizing it. It's just something that can't be avoided. I think the words they put in Cowboy Bebop say it best: there's nothing better than having a place to go. So in this craving, I got into a cycle of ever-shortening relationships, from 7 months to something like 3 to a few weeks, and then eventually just, well, a couple dates. Each time running for silly reasons so stupid I can't remember. And it's really because there was nothing to remember. They were all just excuses brought up on the spot, terrified feelings of other people's uncertainty. How they changed, how their situations changed, how their feelings changed. The fact that I couldn't get a guarantee meant at the first sign of something different, I'd just leave. At the first hint of being hurt, I'd hurt them first, even as they never meant to make me feel anything but loved. And this is a section I keep adding more and more and more to, and then erasing it and writing more and going back, and I think it's because I still feel awful to this day. I'd seen shows like this, and I'd mentioned these aspects of them, and I'd failed to ever see it in myself. One of those relationships I was in, they literally bought me a Cowboy Bebop shirt that I still own now. Our time together was nothing particularly special, and it would never have been something that lasted for our whole lives. But it is just quite ironic, isn't it? A little marker of a lesson I never really learned that hurt them more than me. We have to skip forward a little bit after that, or, well, maybe more like a lot of a bit to pretty recently. Someone I dated in the past moved back to town, and, well, it's like we always just had some kind of thing between us. Our opposites attracted in just the right way, past experiences and current interests pushing and pulling in some weird interplay that no one can really understand to create true interest. It's like, not that we have the same things we're interested in entirely, but they intersect in ways that the passions between these different things are similar, and that is what kind of makes it work. I can't really tell you why it does, it just does. And maybe I can't tell you because for so long I didn't want to know why. It was only a matter of time before I'm coming back to town led to something a bit more serious. But my role in all this was to keep it just not serious enough. Just at somewhere between pretty great friends with a long history that's kind of more than friends and partners, where one could feel pretty valuable but also be able to escape at any time because, well, it's not like we're actually dating or anything. To have an out at the first hint of danger by never confirming any feelings, leaving everything with a hint of ambiguity. Always a wonder of, do they really like me back? That kind of doubt that can be used to reason that it never really mattered. Yeah, I helped them move all their stuff an 8-hour drive and back in one day, but well, that was just the kind of person I was. I would do that for anyone, just a friend thing. And then a couple months later, I told a friend that I couldn't give him a 30-minute ride to a dealership to look at a car. Clearly, the things I was doing in that partnership weren't just for anyone. But I believed what I said, that we weren't more than great friends. In all my active thoughts, that was the truth, a definitive fact, even as all the evidence they and I saw contradicted it and confused them so much. It made no sense, but I believed it. And I believed it because it saved me. That uncertainty had become a shield. I wouldn't get the benefits of true closeness, but that was worth it for never knowing the pain of it ending again. It's some unknown space, somewhere between 3 feet apart on the couch and 300 feet apart in your head. For whatever suits the moment, you can either be right there or so far away they can hardly see you. A sort of weaponized uncertainty of benefits without costs. We'd done a song and dance under the name Friends before, and I was content to leave it there this same time as well. That is, until uncertainty hit me for a change. Because we weren't dating, that meant that we were open to other people, so they decided to take advantage of it this time. While I was floundering around in the hope for something new, a stunted child at heart who'd never learned due to a lack of challenge, they had actually gone out, lived and learned somewhere new, and made themselves better, and gained the desires of others and acted on it. I wasn't the only person in their life in a physically intimate way. In the moment, the physicality of it didn't bother me. I actually thought it was a positive sign, a bit of pressure off that I didn't have to be everything and that what I wanted had actually come to be. They wouldn't be tied to me, the weight of care and concern which spoiled my nights before fading away. But over time, that started to fall to the side as I worried. If I wasn't everything, then someone else was being something, and what if that something was better than my something, and so my something became the lesser something, and there's the greater something, and then everyone realizes this, then my something wasn't anything and cut me out entirely, because what would be the point of my something if my something wasn't worth enough as that other something they could get from the other people? I started to get overwhelmed with this fear that this thing I'd always had as a bit of value to myself would be gone. Another person in the mix wasn't this bullshit uncertainty I took as a blanket, this idea of being separated but not really being so, where I was free but someone else was committed to me. It was a genuine uncertainty, someone expressing a desire and acting on it for something that I wasn't. I couldn't be positive anymore that someone else's time and attention was surely mine, and it was entirely down to my engineering of the situation. My initial reaction was that I wanted to run, of course. Those thoughts got overwhelming, and I wanted them to stop as my creative process was stalled again and again and again, and I couldn't go without noise on at all times, or else I'd be alone with that gnawing anxiety. I'd be writing and stop dead in the middle of sentences as the feelings hit me as I'd verbalize something like, "It's all over, I should just call it," again and again. I remembered these exact feelings and cursed myself, my stomach feeling over, because I knew that caring about other people wasn't worth it. I knew it would come to this, that having feelings for someone else was dangerous, and letting them into your life in a serious way was terrible. And seeing that pain made me realize something. That if I was feeling it again, it meant I'd already done the thing I was trying to avoid. I'd ended up here despite all my efforts. Without ever realizing it, I wanted certainty, even if it could hurt. It was just now that I recognized I'd had it all along due to the backing of someone else. They were always feeling the pain for me to get the benefit. They were sitting on the couch alone waiting for texts as I failed to respond. They were trying to do whatever they could to make it so I wouldn't leave again. And meanwhile, a lot of people had come and left my life, many more than I'd ever have thought when I really look back on it. I'd been to new places and had flings. I'd had them follow me back home a year later, and I hated every second of it. I'd met people in bars and held out hope for great friends, only to be met with no texts, this constant uncertainty of digging for connection in all these places. And meanwhile, here was someone that was always in my life. I'd always wanted to be. It was a place that I could always run to, someone who always cared, someone who knew me and my faults and was still there anyway, even as those faults often hurt them. Someone who was certain among all the chaos. I wasn't afraid of someone else's feelings. I was afraid of my own, of losing that certainty. I'd only succeeded in uncertainty before because it wasn't really uncertain. It was me playing around with the certainty of someone else backing me up, a constant place I could turn to when the next thing messed up. Without that, I didn't know if I'd be able to do it again, or even if I could have ever done it to begin with. All the people I met that led anywhere were because this person pushed me into new spaces with courage anyway. I thought about how they must have been feeling those anxieties all the nights where I refused to confirm anything. I thought about how I'd become the sort of thing that made me feel this way in the first place. I thought about how unavoidable it all was, that even someone who desperately wanted to stay away from it ended up there anyway. And I decided that if that was the case, then I should make it work for me at least. I decided that I would say I love you as the very next words we spoke in person. And the moment I chose to do that, all the anxiety fell away. If I really tried to, I could have found some certainty all along. The sureness of my own feelings and of theirs in return. It just needed to be embraced. And knowing that confirmed it. If I would feel the pain even when I tried to avoid it, then I might as well get real benefits from it. If I would end up here anyway, then the only thing I could do was try my best to make things as certain as possible and to do so again every day. Then when an issue came up, instead of festering in it and hoping it would go away or turning tail, we could just stop and talk about it before anything else. That it was better to take one night away from something fun to protect something genuine and valuable, a place to always go. That on all the actions we take that create chaos, we could also take ones which purposefully worked against it. And the next time I was let into the apartment hall to start a Saturday night, I did exactly what I said I would, before we could even get into the privacy of our own space. I did exactly what I told myself I would never do again, setting myself up to be entirely crushed. To have the possibility that one day this little place I'd built for myself would come crashing down as I had to separate accounts or come to terms with loneliness after years together, that I'd lose my ability to write in desperately sad emotions with someone stolen away from me due to disaster or disease or any other chaos the world created, to own a house, have my life connected with someone else, and if they leave it, knowing that I could not support those things on my own, and knowing that it's so much work to make sure things happen because of that and the stress it puts on us, a future full of these uncertain things. But all those horrible things could happen to someone on their own just the same. Maybe we increase the odds a little bit with more people, maybe we add more factors to it, but we also add our own will, our own desires, when we're conscious of it, that we can try and make it what we want to. That throwing ourselves to the chaos of the world blindly and just rushing through it, that we're at its whims, but at least when we try, when we think about it and try to create that certainty of our own will, it's at least there. That simulating it is at least better than not having it at all. That there's always potential terrible endings to the stories we make, but that the good ones can only happen when we try for them. All good things are our will, someone's will, when we try to make them certain at least.
Anyway, that will wrap things up for this one. No, I don't know what I'm doing with this posing. I just rotated my camera and tilted up a bit and went with it. So this is what we get for the little terrible outro thingy. This was an interesting one to put together. I hope it's alright, because I was writing it in a time where I had stuff written, but I couldn't record for one reason or another. So I ended up having to write something in a moment where I'd really rather record or edit, because I was just too stressed to really, I feel like, write super effectively, and I feel like I was rushing from all this stuff coming up. So I hope the video ended up okay. I think it did, or else I wouldn't have recorded it. It just was written a little faster than I think I normally would. It was originally supposed to be a multiple series thing, but it was one of those times where there's a weird thing that happens when you're writing those multiple series videos where you'll kind of be like, oh, this is great for that series, this is great for that series, this is great for that series. And then you'll kind of re-examine it and be like, oh, this doesn't connect the way I thought it did. This like overarching word I put for the topic doesn't quite actually summarize all the series, and it feels like you end up doing extra work to combine them when they don't need to be, which is why I split this off, which I thought was the best part and made it its own video. It's also been a while since I covered Bebop. I remember there was a video I did a lot of custom transitions for years ago, and I was like, I just have no need to cover the series. I did it perfectly then. And I went back and looked at my script, and it was like recap here, analysis here. It was so little and vague on it that I was like, oh yeah, I have to redo this series. That video was good for what my skill level at the time, not good at all for my skill level now. So at least I'm growing. That's cool. I've gotten better at writing, I think, when I actually go back and examine stuff from like, not the Manic Pixie Nightmare Girl era of Prof, which is where I usually do, but like even further back. But anyway, that's a long, horrible ramble. Let me know if you want to see the other characters of Bebop. I might not do it because I think there's a lot of overlap here, because the series really is, like, they're all engaged in that overarching sense of loneliness that the series does so well. But there might be something there to cover, or let me know what your takes on them or Faye are down below as well. Transparency, of course, me asking for comments helps the video do better in the algorithm, but it also is very encouraging to see other people thinking about that and putting their takes down there in the conversations that happen. So I do, even if I can't respond to them all, at least read through and see what people say, because sometimes I'm wrong, and sometimes you're better at it than me on a specific series or whatever, and that's cool to see, because then I can go, oh, that's a better way of looking at it. I can learn that and utilize it for future things and grow and change, because that's what it's all about. Anyway, this is why I don't go off script. So I'll just leave you with important links, Discord in the pinned comment, and Patreon as well, where I'm going to try to start doing monthly Q&As to get some extra support there, provide some real benefit, where these lovely people above me are supporting me and asking questions and such already. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.